make friends with people that are doing the same thing. And that was part of the reason why I started Seller Summit, to be honest with you. Also, people are asking for it, and I wanted a community of people doing the same thing that I was.
All right, welcome back to the Untrapped Entrepreneur Show. I've got Steve Chou here. Steve and I met at Seller Summit. So Steve is like a conference king in my mind. If it's okay if I call you conference king,
Yeah,
because
I only run one event just once a year. Definitely
dude,
not the king,
it was
but
amazing. So Steve runs Seller Summit. He's got a collection of e-commerce businesses, but Seller Summit was all about selling on Amazon and direct to consumer and e-commerce. And as many of you know, I'm kind of stepping really big into that world right now. But if you've listened to some of the other shows, you know how we open up. And I figured a robot knew more about you, Steve, than I could ever find out on my own. So I normally use Chat GPT, but because you have this book, and for listeners, I'm holding up the Family First Entrepreneur book that Steve just wrote. Chat GPT is like not keeping up with the times. And so I had to go over to Bing Chat because you're like doing so many new things all at once. So I'm going to read a bio from Bing Chat, and the challenge to you, Steve, is tell us if it's telling the truth or if it's lying at any point in my bio.
okay.
All right, here we go. So it says, welcome to the Untrapped Entrepreneur Podcast, where we help you break free from the shackles of your business and live a life of freedom and fulfillment. That's accurate. That's good. I didn't create that. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Steve Chou, the author of Family First Entrepreneur, How to Achieve Financial Freedom Without Sacrificing What Matters Most. Steve is a successful entrepreneur who runs 2 7-figure businesses in less than 20 hours a week while spending quality time with his family and friends. He's also the founder of MyWifeQuitHerJob.com, a popular blog and podcast that teaches people how to start profitable online businesses. And in his book, Steve shares his insights and advice on how to balance work and life, avoid burnout, create a family-first mindset. He also reveals the simple principles that can guide every decision you make as an entrepreneur, helping you build a solid foundation for your dream life. Steve, how did Bing Chat do?
It's a little sensationalistic, but outside of that, I'd say pretty accurate. Yeah.
Okay. You want to fill in any gaps or expand on anything there you'd like us to know about you?
I mean, bottom line, so I sell handkerchiefs online with my wife. That was our first business. And as soon as I started that business, all my friends started asking me, how we did it. And so I decided to document that on a blog called MyWifeQuitHerJob.com. That was in 2009. My friends didn't read it at all. And then I just got random people reading it. And then people asked for a training class. I started a podcast shortly after that, which led to a YouTube channel. People asked for an event. So I decided to throw an event. That was the one that you attended. And here we are. There's basically everything that I do is the result of people asking for stuff and me deciding whether I actually want to do it or not.
I got to ask you a really important question. Your friends didn't even read your own work, huh?
They did not. And they were the ones asking me because I live in the Silicon Valley. They're all engineers, doctors, lawyers, working heavy hours. And they wanted to, retire, I guess. But no, they didn't read it. My mom didn't even read anything. In fact, one of my motivations for writing the book was for my mom to finally understand something that I do. Because, she doesn't understand content. She doesn't really understand e-commerce because it wasn't around when she grew up. But she understands the book. So finally got the validation that I've been seeking all of my life.
I just had my dad. I hadn't seen my dad in a couple of years, and he just came in last night. And my son was supposed to have an open heart surgery tomorrow, his 4th. It got rescheduled. But I was talking to my dad last night. And I don't want to throw him under the bus, but my dad has no idea. I think anything that I do, like barbershop is the only thing. He's like, I think I've got that. But I walked him into the gents place many years ago. And he walked in and he looks around, and he says, I don't get it, and walked out. So I might try to write a book.
You should. He'll understand that. He will.
So what this show is about, and hopefully it's different from what you have, what you've experienced as a guest, and then you also have your own podcast, and what you've experienced as a host, is diving in deep into as many of these traps that entrepreneurs can fall into and helping them find their way out as quickly as possible, because it is like quicksand when you fall into it, and especially if there's no one around that's been there. Some of them get eaten up. Most of them do. I think there's all kinds of stats out there. 85% of small businesses fail within X amount of years, 3 years, 5 years. And so my hope is there's people sitting on the sideline that are looking to start a business. They can do some discerning and some listening and hopefully avoid some of those things. And for those of us that are in the thick of it, maybe we're in the middle of a trap right now, or we can see ahead because I remember Steve saying, watch out for this. Um, you had a job, your wife had a job. Um, and I imagine there was probably just an initial trap, not necessarily an entrepreneurial one, but talk to us about that trap you were in just as a family, that ultimately led to creating your own business.
Actually, I didn't feel trapped in my job. I actually loved my job.
Mm.
I would still be working there today if it made sense. My wife, on the other hand, she didn't like her job at all. So it was clear that she had to move on. And that's why, when she became pregnant, she was like, hey, I'm done.
Mhm.
And I agreed with that because my parents were first generation. They came here with nothing and they worked their butts off to put my brother and I through college and everything. I didn't get to see him that much. So I was fully on board with that, with my wife quitting. Where we live in the Silicon Valley, education is important to us. In order to get a good house in a good school district, pretty much need two incomes.
Mhm.
So that's why we brainstormed different ways that we could actually make some money, while my wife was at home taking care of our first child. And that's when we came up with handkerchiefs. And it's pretty random, but back when we got married in 2003, we spent all this money on photography. And my wife, she's a crier. Like she cries all the time when she's happy. She cries when she's sad. Hopefully, she doesn't get sad that often. But she knew she was going to cry at the wedding, and
Mhm.
she didn't want the photos to be taken of her crying with tissues. So we looked all over for handkerchiefs, couldn't find any. Finally, found this factory in China. Had to buy a bunch. So we bought a bunch and we used a handful of them, sold the rest on eBay, and they sold right away. And so that's how we got that idea. So I guess our story is different from the traditional. I was an electrical engineer designing microprocessors. I was the director, and I love that work because I got to work with so many smart people from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford. And the only reason I quit that job, as I mentioned, like I went down to 4 days, I went down to 3 days, I went down to 2 days, and I went down to one day, which was really awesome. And then finally, my big boss left, and a new boss came in, pulled me in the office, and was like, "Hey, Steve, what do you do here?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna be straight up with you. I don't do anything. I'm here in case something breaks."
Mhm.
Because I was one of three lead designers on the entire product that was making the most money. And after that, he basically said he didn't need me anymore, and that's how it started. Yeah.
Well, some of the things that we don't think about as traps, I kind of put in that bucket. And being with my wife since we were 16, and how long have you been married or with your
This
wife?
is our 20th year. Actually,
No
we're
way.
celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we just celebrated 18 years married,
Wow.
this
Okay.
past week. So congrats on 20 years. That's incredible. Um, Marriage is hard, man. Like a trap that I think about that you mentioned here is it's a partnership, and like wife comes to you with, you know, basically like a challenge, a problem that needs to be solved, because the trap in our society today is it's so expensive to live here. We need two incomes. And she, it's this partnership, and she's like, "Hey, I don't want to do this." And you go, "I agree, but how are we going to make this work?" And most people just say, "We're just stuck." And you guys decided to not be stuck and say, "We're going to figure this out." Um, where do you get that from? Like I don't think that would be, if we looked at percentages of the times, like 100 people that's happened to. I think it'd be a very small percentage of people that went down your path. But like, was that like parent taught? It was just a mindset that you have of like, I'm going to figure this thing out.
I mean, my background's an engineer, and pretty much what we do is solve problems, right? I think the first instinct that most people have in our situation is maybe I'll get another job. Maybe I'll work at night, and that sort of thing. But you know, in my mind, I wanted to see my kids too. And my job was pretty cushy actually at the time. So it didn't really make sense to get another job. And it really just depends on what you want your standard of living to be. Like for us, having a good schools, good public schools in our area was extremely important. So what are the alternatives? You lower your lifestyle tremendously and get a house in a bad school district. I mean, that wasn't really an option, right? So it's just by necessity that you figure things out.
Hmm. Well, engineering background certainly, I think, helps drive that. Okay, so let's. You've started a business now. You guys are trying to make it work. You're selling handkerchiefs, which you probably never thought you'd be in the handkerchief selling
Never.
business.
In fact, I was kind of ashamed of it because I belong in this entrepreneurship community. So I went to Stanford and I belong to this community called the Mayfield Fellows Club. And
Hmm.
that club is designed for you to get funding and then start like the next unicorn, right? So that was the environment I was in. And whenever I went to these yearly meetups, the first question would be like, "Hey, Steve, how's the handkerchief business?" You know. Meanwhile, they're starting like so. Kevin's sister of Instagram was in that group, and here, everyone in there is starting $100 million companies, $1 billion companies, and I'm here hawking hankies. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Okay, so there's another trap too, I think, of just keeping up the appearance, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, however you want to describe it, is I now feel something emotionally that I'm
yep.
not good enough, that I'm not achieving enough. How do you get out of that? Or how have you gotten out of that? What's your experience?
You just stop hanging out with those people unless you have to, right? Because if
Hmm.
someone's making you feel ashamed, then that's something's wrong, I think,
Yeah.
right? I mean, everyone has their own way. Everyone's got to find their own path. And if you're not hanging out with the right people, even when I started the handkerchief business, I had friends that would kind of mockingly say, "Hey, well, how's the handkerchief business?" Because they didn't think that it was going anywhere. Even my parents were skeptical. And, to be honest with you, it doesn't sound like a great business, right? At
Hmm.
first glance. So you just make friends with people that are doing the same thing. And that was part of the reason why I started Seller Summit, to be honest with you, also. People are asking for it, and I wanted a community of people doing the same thing that I was.
Hmm. Yeah, and that had, I would imagine, well, just attending Seller Summit, talking to the people I talked to, I believe you've created a tribe of folks that not just are trying to sell more online, e-commerce, Amazon, but are actually aligned with you from a values standpoint. Have you found that just with the community there that not everybody's the same, but you have some synergies there?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because the people who attend Seller Summit are people who read my blog and listen to my podcast. And I talk about those things. And the brand is called My Wife Quit Her Job. So
Hmm.
I actually attract a lot of female entrepreneurs. So I would say, like in the classes that I run, it's majority female, which is unusual, I think, among entrepreneurship communities. Because when I go to other events, it's often a bro fest,
Okay.
right? I don't know how many events you've gone to, Ben, but
Well,
yeah.
no, it is. And I'm laughing thinking about as a husband, the wife following this, my wife quit her job blog, and the husband saying, like, what are you reading over? Like, stop that. Don't read that because we need two incomes. Like, who's this Steve guy? Well, at least if, from what I've seen on the blog, though, you're actually giving, in this case, a lot of these women a path to freedom. Like, hey, you can still quit your job, but also support your family financially. Is that the idea?
It is, and I'm actually a big proponent of someone being at home, at least during the early years, to just develop your kids because they're an investment also, and they're like little businesses in themselves. I mean,
Hmm.
that's kind of how I treat them. And you got to put your time in to help develop them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I watched a podcast episode that you did, and one of the things that you recommended was not outsourcing. And let me know if I get this right or wrong, but not outsourcing work, hiring someone outside of your company until you have some familiarity. And this may be a question for you: is it familiarity or is it mastering a skill before you outsource it? Walk me through that.
Yeah. So I generally don't outsource anything unless I have working knowledge of that topic. Not mastery, just working knowledge. So so I can't get BS'd.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I give this advice is, and I run a class, and every now and then I'll have a student who just blindly hires someone to do their SEO, or blindly hires someone to do their advertising. And if you don't know what you're doing in the first place, like you have no knowledge at all, it's really easy for them to, do stuff that isn't optimal, and you wouldn't know any better because you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what good even means. And so that's why I say, you should get your hands dirty first, right? Understand at a low level how to do something at the basic level and then hire it out. So at least you know the questions that you can ask. You know if someone's doing a good job or not.
Mm-hmm. I think that's contrary when you think about this whole kind of ecosystem that I feel like you and I are both building in different ways of this untrapped entrepreneur. Um, I think that's contrary advice to what you see out there. It's like if you want to entrap yourself, is shed all these responsibilities. If someone else can do it, they should do it, not you. The advice that you're giving, it could at least at first glance cause someone to go, wait, how am I ever going to get out of it? If everything has to go through me and then through someone else, how can I ever untrap myself? So how I agree with you, by the way. I always learned something at least at some level so I can call BS. So I'm 100% in alignment with you. I think some people are going to listen to this and go, that's not possible. That doesn't make any sense. Just statistically, if everything has to go through me first, I'm never going to get out of this. How do you how do you answer someone that kind of challenges you in that way?
I mean, if something that's true in the long run, but I mean, this is just temporary, right? You're just learning the ropes, and you are going to eventually delegate this task out to someone. You're just learning how it works so you don't get cheated, basically. So it might extend your time frame a little bit to outsourcing everything, but it also protects you from getting destroyed. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a student in my class who outsourced their search engine optimization to a firm that was doing some sketchy stuff, building backlinks to properties that were unsavory and whatnot, and basically destroyed her entire SEO to the point where her site pretty much didn't have a good chance to rank at all unless she did a lot of unwinding of the work that was done by that consultant. That could easily have been avoided if she had any knowledge of SEO in the first place. She would have known right off that what that guy was doing was not going to be a good long-term solution.
Hmm.
Right?
Okay.
So you're protecting yourself in the future by taking a little bit of time up front right now to learn something.
Yeah.
So I don't even think of it as a bottleneck. Uh, Plus, you should learn yourself. If you're running an online business, you should know how it works at a high level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you said about long-term view is really important because most of the time when someone is stuck, they're just trying to get rid of things and they're focused on this short-term problem that they have. So if you already cast this vision out of, I'm going to grow my business over time in this way, and I don't need to be seven figures this year, but I'm going to be on this path, seven figures revenue or six figures in profit, whatever that is, that does help you plan for those things. I'm going to spend a month learning this, and then I'm going to outsource it and delegate it because I have the time to do it. So I think having that strategic plan that I'm willing to go. I'm willing to go the distance here. A lot of times, these entrepreneurs they have, man, I'm starting this business and it's a 3 to 5 year. And I'm going to flip it and exit and sell it. And then if you're on that time frame where it's really compressed, you don't have time to learn something and delegate it in their mindset, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing that you can do actually is like outsource your marketing when you have no idea how to do it yourself. I mean, I just have countless friends who wanted to scale really quickly, just as you described, because there's like this time window where they want to exit. And no one's going to really know your marketing as well as you do. So to try to outsource that is problematic unless you have a firm grasp of what works in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, I want to talk about your I'll call it coaching business for lack of a better word, but you've got a group of people that you are coaching, they're paying you money for advice. You have regular meetups, calls, you have podcast. You have a lot of impressions, like number of people, entrepreneurs that you've seen make probably every mistake in the book. What would you say is the most common trap of let's call them the startup or like sub $1 million revenue entrepreneur? What's the most one or two most common traps that you're finding yourself advising on?
I think the biggest trap that I see right now, and I think this is really the fault of social media, is that if you look on YouTube, social media, whatnot, there's like strategies being thrown at you left and right, right? And you try to do everything because you heard somewhere that this is the next big thing, and you end up trying everything and not doing anything well. And I'm a firm believer of just like picking some, like you can try everything on the surface, but as soon as you see traction on any one strategy, for example, you go all in on that strategy, kind of drop everything until you've mastered that one strategy, and then you move on gradually instead of just trying everything.
Hmm. Is there any particular approach right now where if someone is they're not getting the results on YouTube or on social media, is there something that's working right now if they feel completely trapped? They've dumped money into everything. What would be your advice there if they're saying, I don't know what to do?
I mean, it really just depends on the type of product. I mean, there's business isn't black and white, it's all shades of gray. So let me just see if I can come up with a quick example. Okay, so let's say you sell something and you've been just running Google ads this whole time and it's not working for you. Well, chances are it's because either the search terms that you're going for your product are just way too expensive and competitive, or there's just not enough search volume, right? So for a product like that, maybe it makes sense to pivot towards like Facebook ads, where you can actually craft a nice creative to get someone to buy something without having them search for it. That's just like a quick and dirty example.
Mm-hmm.
And if you find that something's not working and you've been pivoting the entire time trying different things, you mentioned YouTube, right? YouTube, it should work, right? It should work. There's just too many variables, and chances are you just haven't tried the right strategy. So if you're pivoting, then maybe get some outside help to give you a fresh perspective on something that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to ads, the example that I just gave kind of applies. Like certain ads just don't work for certain products. It's just the way it is, right? If you sell something kind of more hip and exciting and has a really strong value prop, Facebook and Instagram works really well. If it has search volume, Google works pretty well. So there's just too many variables. And if you want to go deeper into this, we can throw out some examples of products and maybe go through it. But it's not
Yeah.
black and white.
No,
Yeah.
I think for the purposes of this show, well, one is you've got to go follow Steve because he is an e-commerce expert. He may not call himself that, but he is an expert. And I've seen some of your content and it's super helpful. For the purposes of this show, though, Steve, I think it's really important. You have such, dramatic and extensive experience in talking to people that are trapped. Like that's the reason probably why they show up at your doorstep. Like I tried it myself. I tried to hire somebody and now I'm here and please help me. And so I think your entire like job in that role is untrapping people in some way or the other. I want to flip to the personal side of that, both for you and for maybe some of the folks that are some of your students. Um, Navigating this whole, I have a wife and I have kids and I have a kid with health issues but I also have this burning desire and I don't know why to start my own business or to run my own business. I'm just wired this way. I can't turn it off. That could be really frustrating because it's like I wish I didn't. I wish I wanted to go work at a bank 9 to 5. And just life would be so much easier to do that. But I can't turn that off. And I have a wife and kids and other obligations and all these other things I care about just as much. And so as an entrepreneur, you find yourself because you can't change who you are in a really difficult situation a lot of times. So for you, you've been married 20 years. Either for you or your students, like if you have somebody coming to you or this is yourself going, I have to do it all. Like I have to be an entrepreneur. I have to. Don't tell me to go get a job. Um, how do you handle that type of situation? And they're not making a ton of money right now. They're not making enough to cover the bills. What's some of your advice there? Because it's a tough situation. It's a big trap. And in your heart as an entrepreneur, you don't want to tell them to go get a 9 to 5 because that's not going to fill up their spirit, but they're also not providing for their family.
One piece of advice I always give to people who are new is have that nest egg saved before you get started. So you're never really put in the situation because you don't want to be making business decisions based on the money, right? You want to not have to buy, not be able to buy that tool that'll help you because you're on a budget. But if you're in that situation that you just outlined, where your business isn't working and you're not paying the bills, I mean, you got to suck it up and go back to work or something, right? Build up that nest egg. I mean, entrepreneurship. I chat with this with my buddies all the time. I mean, it kind of sucks. Like what you see on the surface, on the YouTube videos and the Facebook videos, or all the highlight reel stuff.
Hmm.
But I mean, the day to day is just kind of dull and boring. It's kind of like a slog, right?
Hmm.
So, and if you're not making ends meet and you don't really have like a good vision into it turning around anytime soon, yeah, suck it up. And you got I mean, your family is first, and you got to pay the bills. So go get that job and just work on the business on the side.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I had a situation in my life where, I mean, we were up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I was like, I don't know what we're going to do about health insurance. And my wife said, I'll go get a job at Starbucks. And I was like, no, you can't do that. And she's like, no, I'm going to do it. It's the best health insurance. I can work from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. and you can stay home with the kids. And then you can work from 11 till whenever. And we had to do that. Like it was one of those things where we're going to make this work no matter what. Um, and that was, talking about partnership. Like my wife knew that she was not going to convince me and she didn't want me to go work that 9 to 5. So you got to make it happen, right? Like how bad do you really want it as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of things that I don't particularly like,
Mhm.
and eventually I'll probably outsource it, but things just got to get done
Mm.
at the end of the day. So,
Hey, so on that note, because I just, right before this podcast, I was doing something that someone else can do. And it's not that hard, but I love doing it. And it takes me about an hour and a half a week. But I love doing it. It's like probably like a little, like an engineering project for an engineer. It has to do with some of my ordering that we do and some supply chain stuff. I just like it. And like every week I go, but it has to be done on Mondays and Tuesdays. And so it pops up on my calendar and I do it. And like every week I go, well, someone else could be doing this, but, and it's highly inefficient. And it goes against like everything that I would like tell people like, hey, if someone else can do it, delegate it out. Um, but I like it. And it's like high value add. It allows me to not hire any employees in this particular business. Zero employees, right? It's a 7-figure business. Um, I'm just curious. Do you have anything like that where you're just not willing to let it go, but you could?
absolutely. So I'm an engineer and I miss doing that type of work. So when there's like a new plugin that I see on Shopify, I'll just write it myself
Mm-hmm.
instead of paying the recurring fees. It might be cheap. It might be like $50 a month, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, if I just write it, I've saved myself $50 a month in perpetuity, and I enjoy that process
Yeah.
because I miss it. That's what I used to do at my full-time job.
Oh
And
man. I
I
love
could
it.
hire a developer, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that because you do things that you don't like to do and you have, sometimes you have a choice, sometimes you don't. But when you have a choice to do something you love to do, like that's one of my favorite things as an entrepreneur. Like I get to choose to do this because I love it. And no one can take that away from me. It's
Absolutely.
an incredible
Yeah.
feeling to have. Okay. So I want you to go back in time over your entrepreneurial journey and was there a moment in time or any moments in time? Now, this is after you've started the business, right? Or your first business, where you got to the point where you said, this is not working. Like this entrepreneur business ownership thing is not working. There's a fork in the road. Maybe there was like we should shut the business down. This entrepreneur thing isn't working. Could be that, or it could just be we need to take a pause because what we're doing right now is not sustainable going forward, and there needs to be a big shift. Do you have any moments like that in your journey?
So my wife had that moment. I thought things were fine. So this was when our business was doing really well, actually. And what ended up happening to me is that I developed this fever where I just wanted to grow it, grow it, grow it. I think it was purely for ego reasons. Mainly is because maybe it was because I was a member of that club and I just wanted to show that this handkerchief business could be something big. So
Mhm.
we would hit our goals, and then I would just raise the goalpost and say, "Hey, we're going to grow 50% next year." And my wife would usually flip out,
Mhm.
and we'd work extra hard. Sometimes I'd burn the list, and we'd hit the goal, and I'd be like, "All right, well, great, we hit it. That wasn't too bad. Let's grow another 50%."
Mhm.
And then meanwhile, we were just burning ourselves out. And one day my wife just went up to me and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore. We already make way more money than we spend. So why are we busting our butts trying to make extra money that we're not even using? Meanwhile, we're working extra hard just to achieve these imaginary goals." And it was at that point where we kind of changed things, when my wife and I had that conversation. So it's really, I mean, I see this happen with a lot of my colleagues also. It's just something magical happens when you start making money, or more money than you've ever made in your life. You just want more of it and you just want to grow, grow, grow. But that
Mhm.
often leads to unhappiness.
That is, I feel like that's the biggest trap for me in particular, and I do see this in a lot of other people, is this advice that, like, just say no more often. I kind of thought, I synthesized that. And I'm like, that's stupid. I can't do that as an entrepreneur because I'm such an opportunistic thinker. I want to do new things. I like innovation. Um, the just say no, it's impossible for me. But just say yes to everything, that's also stupid and that's not sustainable and scalable. So I convinced myself that when these opportunities do present themselves to grow the business 50% or 100% of this, I've convinced myself to say it depends. And that allows me to discern. It's like, Steve, you call me up next week. You're like, Ben, you told me all about your business. I have the best business idea ever, and it's going to double your business, right? It's going to make you millions of dollars, and you can work 1 hour a week. It sounds like the best thing ever. And I trust you. I've got to go, Steve. It depends. How many hours a week is it again? And do I need to hire employees, and how long will that take? And will that take my nights and weekends? And like, what's the commitment level? And I start asking questions. So like the it depends plus asking questions for me is a way for me to avoid that trap, because if I don't have that mechanism in place, and I saw this early on in my career, I just say yes to everything that sounds good. Like every business idea that I can add value in, or it could add value to me, I'm like, yeah, man, let's try it. I'm a serial entrepreneur. That's what I do. Right.
Yeah. I
Um,
asked myself a similar question. It's phrased a little bit differently. I asked myself, what do I have to give up in order to do this?
mm,
Right? Like, do I have to give up, like my tennis lessons or something in order to fit this in the schedule? Stuff like that, and whether it's worth it to me.
yeah, I love that. Just being able to take that pause, I think, is really important. And I wish I would have learned that sooner. Normally, Steve, we have a show sponsor, and it's one of my brands because I'm an entrepreneur and it's my show, and I get to, promote my own stuff. But today, we're going to promote a
Yay!
book I found.
Nice.
Picked it up at Sellers Summit, the Family First Entrepreneur. So you launched a book a handful of months ago. It's doing really well. And for those of you that are just listening in, it's a big yellow book called The Family First Entrepreneur: How to Achieve Financial Freedom Without Sacrificing What Matters Most. Um, Tell us about how, I don't want to go through like, a deep dive on the book. What I want to know is, for our audience is trying to untrap themselves, like, why should they read this book, to untrap themselves along this journey? And is there a chapter, like I'm looking at chapter 1? This is where I told Steve, I'm like, this is where I reached out to him literally after reading this. If you guys are watching on video here, and if you're not, chapter 1 is escaping the entrepreneur trap. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to contact Steve immediately. So I know this book is for our audience, and I know probably every page is good, but how should they use this? Is there a particular chapter or concept they should hone in on?
Let me first but just say that the reason why I wrote the book is because I read a lot of business books, and almost all of them are written by dudes, single dudes, with no responsibilities.
Yes, so
Uh,
true.
there was no book that catered to someone who had a family, who actually wanted to spend time with them, who couldn't really afford to work 80 hours a week,
Hmm.
right? So this book is for someone who wants to make a lot of money in business and still have time to do the stuff that they want to do, right? So really, if I were to just sum it up in just like a couple sentences, it's about how to pursue entrepreneurship in a way that allows you to enjoy the stuff that you actually want to be doing. Because what I've discovered is that most people don't start a business to get rich. I mean, that might be a byproduct, but most people don't want to start like the next Facebook, the next Amazon, whatnot. They just want time to do what they want to do and time to spend time with people that they love, right? And the book is really about how I run my businesses efficiently using automation and whatnot so that I can reduce the stresses of actually running a business and then free up that time to do what I want to do with it.
Hmm.
It's not about making like $100 million. It's about making enough and doing enough to keep yourself interested and making plenty of money at the same time.
Do people need to decide what is enough at at the beginning of that journey or at some point?
I mean, that changes. I think in the beginning of your journey, you have to decide what's important. So in the book, I talk about the four burners theory. And if you guys aren't familiar with that, anyone listening
I
is,
love it. You got to talk about it because I
uh,
that was like all my notes in the conference were around four burners.
okay. Well, the four burners theory states that your life is kind of dictated by four burners. So you have family, work, health, and friends. And in order to do one thing well, you have to turn off at least one of the burners. And if you want to do something really well, you have to turn off two. And what basically that theory states is that you need to prioritize what's important to you. So I'll tell you that for my burners, the family and the health one are the highest. Probably the health and the business ones are equal, but it allows you to, once you know what your priorities are, it allows you to make business decisions more effectively or any sort of decisions more effectively. Like, is starting this business going to prevent me from going to all my kids' ball games? If so, then I'm not going to do it.
Hmm.
So you got to decide up front what your priorities are. Otherwise, you can get easily carried away.
I just had this flashback from undergrad business school at UT, and it was my first finance class. And the professor said, "Okay, when you all graduate, tell me some of the things that you want to buy." And someone's like, "I want to buy a house. I want to buy a car and buy this, buy that." And they go, "Okay, well, what else do you want to spend your money on?" "I want to go out to fancy restaurants." And I went, so we got a list of all these things, and I'll never forget it. And there's a class like 550 people. He said, "Choose one. Choose one." And that all hit me. And he goes, "Choose one. You are not going to be able to do all of it all at once." And so when you're talking about four burners, isn't that the idea? Is like you can't throw all four burners up full at high speed. Just it's impossible. Something is going to break down.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Elon Musk. I mean, he's got all three burners off. He's only got the work burner going, right? So,
I think he has like 10 kids with like five different people too.
yeah, and I'm sure he doesn't see any of them.
No.
So,
Oh man. Well, Steve, I was so glad that I met you very briefly at Seller Summit. Um, there was a reason why I went to that conference, and I thought it was to learn how to sell on Amazon. And I realized leaving it was because you and the book that you wrote and the connection that we were able to make afterwards is the real reason why I ended up going there. Because I really had no business being there because I had told you before I was like this little baby, like selling not hardly anything online. And people, I'm like sitting between a guy that's selling $30 million on Amazon at lunch, another guy selling 10, and they're like, "How much you selling on Amazon?" I'm like, "I just got on Amazon and I'm trying to figure out what the heck it is." Um, so I probably shouldn't have been there, but I know the reason why, and I'm really glad that we connected. And I love the work that you're doing, and it's in perfect alignment with what I am talking about and preaching and trying to live out every day as an entrepreneur. Despite that, the nagging and the opportunities that knock at my door that I always want to say yes to. It is like a disease, right? To say, yes, I've got to
It is.
constantly fight against it. Um, but a book like Family First Entrepreneur, the show here, the guests that we're bringing on, like Steve, hopefully you guys get some value out of learning how to fight the good fight and to invest the time where it matters most in your life. So, Steve, thank you, my friend. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate the work that you're doing and the time that you gave us today.
Thanks for having me on, Ben.
Hey,
Appreciate it.
real quick too,
Yeah.
you have so many websites. Like, what's the best place if someone goes, I love Steve and I want to follow him? Is it Twitter? Is it somewhere else as a website?
Just mywifequitterjob.com.
Okay.
Easiest place to find me.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.